Welcome to Sunday Science, where we dive into a few recent scientific articles and their translation into our modern lives. Here is your host, Brent W. Lartz, MD.
All right, today we are having our first episode of Sunday Science from Go On Pro. This is dated November 2nd, 2025. We're going to discuss how your diet, your microbiome, and genetics can cause colon cancer in young people. Not only that, but it could have been your diet and your microbiome in childhood that could have started the whole process here. Colon cancer causes approximately 1.9 million cases per year and 900,000 deaths. It is the second leading cause of cancer deaths globally while being the fourth most common diagnosed cancer. What does that mean? If it's the second leading cause of cancer deaths, but the fourth most common diagnosed cancer, it means it could be somewhat more deadly than a couple of other types of cancer. In the US, 154,000 new cases occurred in 2023 and the incidence is declining, and there are 52,900 deaths in the year 2023, deaths also declining, likely related to increased screening and increased lifestyles, better lifestyles. The 5-year survival of localized colon cancer is 91%, and for all stages, it is 65%. Risk factors including a sedentary lifestyle, diet high in processed foods and red meat, smoking, lack of exercise, ethanol, genetics, inflammatory bowel disease, and certainly the outcomes of these cancers are associated with access to care. Early colon cancer statistics, the incidence is rising in those under age 50 and 55 years of age. 10% of colon cancer is in patients who are under age 50, rising approximately 2% per year. And that's a 51% increase since 1994. Approximately 7,000 to now more than 15,000 cases per year in those under age 50. Potentially another statistic that is bantered about is 20% of those under age 55. Colon cancer is rising as well. It used to be that this was only seen in young persons if they had a genetic familial basis for colon cancer. These are persons with a couple of different genetic illnesses, one called familial adenomatous polyposis. That syndrome is autosomal dominant in about 50% of the cases. And most of the rest are new mutations that we can now determine. These persons have colons that are filled with polyps, and hence, if you have a colon filled with polyps by the time you're age 30 or 40, all the more likelihood you're going to get colon cancer. And hence, some of these persons have their colons taken out prophylactically to prevent colon cancer. However, now most of these, or at least some of these cases of early colon cancer are potentially linked to the microbiome. Early colon cancer is now the deadliest cancer in young men, and it is the second most deadly cancer in young women. And often this is related to a delay in diagnosis because at age 40, before, we were less likely to have a colon test to diagnose and or screen for these illnesses because it was very uncommon. But given the increased prevalence and incidence of these diseases, we are now seeing these screening ages dropping to what they used to be. 54% of patients with early colon cancer were misdiagnosed as hemorrhoids, irritable bowel syndrome, etc. 36% saw 3 or more doctors before their diagnosis, and the symptoms of which change in bowel habits, bleeding, abdominal pain. Now we have screened and a recommendation to screen at age 45 or sooner if you have risk factors. There are genetic and environmental causes. The type and the pattern and the location of the mutations causing these colon cancers depends on the chemical. And potentially tobacco and other carcinogens have a certain pattern of mutations that are associated with them. And these are being discovered and have been discovered for many years. But now we're finding a particular type of mutation that is associated with your bacteria in your intestine. Let's talk a little bit about the mutations in colon cancer. The first we're going to talk about is adenomatous polyposis coli tumor suppressor gene. These, when you get a mutation in this gene, you will acquire a benign adenoma. And this mutation in this gene is present in over 80% of colorectal cancer. Its function is to maintain homeostasis of the gut epithelium. So you can see why this particular mutation would potentially cause inflammation and then cause polyps and then cause an adenoma. Epidermal growth factor receptor mutations then potentially can add on to that mutation for colorectal cancer progression. And then subsequent mutations, there are multiple ones. KRAS, PTEN, and TP53 are a few of the other mutations. Screening for colon cancer, the gold standard is colonoscopy, but there is also a couple of other tests. You've all heard of these tests that are found on commercials during multiple different broadcasts on cable TV. There's also a blood DNA test. The difference is the colonoscopy is the gold standard. And this is the only way that you can remove some of these precancerous polyps before they develop cancer. The stool for DNA tests are good tests at screening for precancerous, but they do miss some of these. And they're also, their specificity is not 100%. Therefore, you could have false positives. Now, there is a microbiome link, and here's where we're going to talk about this. There are colibactin-producing E. coli that are not the same strains that cause diarrhea. And you think about your hamburger or other types of food-based diarrhea caused by E. coli. These are different strains. Colibactin is a DNA mutagen, and causes certain mutation patterns. And those mutation patterns can be detected in colon cancer, and hence we're going to be talking about that later in some of these new articles. We're going to be talking about 3 new articles that are related to this. It is possibly related to exposure as a child because it takes a long time for these mutations to build up and also for them to now then acquire other mutations requiring that are required to develop colorectal cancer. Up to 68% of colorectal cancers are colonized with PKS E. coli. This is the colibactin producing E. coli, also called PKS positive E. coli. All right, we're going to be talking about first an article in the Lancet Microbiome, which was published in April of 2025. This article had examined the genomes of 981 bowel cancer patients and their cancer cells in 11 countries. Under 40 cancer diagnosis, if you were diagnosed at age 40 or less, you were 3.3 times more likely to have colibactin mutations than if you were greater than 70 and you had colon cancer. It is more prevalent, this colibactin mutations, in countries that had higher rates of early onset cancer. These polyketide synthase positive E. coli strains produced E. coli produced colibactin, and hence then developed the colon cancer potentially. Another article from Nature Microbiology from 2025 studied dietary fiber and its inhibition of colibactin. They studied mice with three different types of diet, either a low carb, low fiber diet, high fat, high sugar diet, or normal chow. The PKS positive bacteria induced senescence-associated secretory phenotype, which further potentiated by inflammatory triggers in mismatch repair deficient model, was um, associated with increases in those PKS positive bacteria. The low carb, low fiber diet was associated with a higher amount of PKS positive bacteria. The high fat, high sugar diet and the normal chow were associated with low um, amount of PKS positive bacteria comparatively. One issue here is what if you had a low carb, high fiber diet instead of a high fat, high sugar diet or some other types of diets? Certainly, there are more than one types of different diet that you could study in this situation. Um, Frontiers in Microbiology article from 2025 also showed that inulin, which potentially we think of inulin as being a good thing in our diet because it is a fiber that decreases inflammation in most patients. However, this article investigated inulin because it was found potentially to be protective, but it also has tumor promoting effects. This article showed that if you had a combination of PKS positive bacteria instilled into these mice that were prone to develop cancer, they were APC mutated mice, and then they were treated with DSS to stimulate tumors. If those PKS positive mice were also then given inulin, then it promoted tumors in those mice. If a strain of E. coli deficient in colibactin, it's the same PKS positive mice, but they did not produce colibactin. If that was introduced instead of the PKS positive colibactin producing bacteria, then less tumors were found. If you gave a paraprobiotic, which was pasteurized E. coli, same strain, actually a Nissl strain, which was a pasteurized paraprobiotic, that also inhibited the tumorigenesis. Very confounding results here, suggesting that it's not just the PKS positive, but potentially maybe the competition in the intestines of these mice with either other strains of E. coli or a paraprobiotic that has good factors produced by certain probiotic strains that was tumor protective. Other colon cancer issues, you certainly need a driver mutation. And so that driver mutation may be these colibactin induced mutations that were induced as a child. And then you need pro-cancer and passenger pro-progression bacteria. So there are certain bacteria that induce either directly producing compounds that cause DNA damage or inflammation that causes that damage. And then once there is a mutation causing a tumor, now you might need passenger pro-progression bacteria. And this is another theory that your microbiome is important. Fecal transplants from colon cancer mice can transfer the disease to germ-free mice. This was discovered in 2013, quite a while ago, so suggesting that there is something about the something in the feces in general, the bacteria that then produce colon cancer in these mice. And then there are also evidence that microbial dysbiosis can affect some tumorigenesis as well. There are short-chain fatty acids that bacteria produce that could stimulate polyps. And then there is in persons such as those with Lynch syndrome, which is a syndrome that is prone to develop colon cancer, um, the microbes, if they are present in those patients, can produce 8-oxoguanine. Those 8-oxoguanine lesions produce a mismatch repair system dysfunction and hence your production of colon cancer in those patients. And as we talked about, dysbiosis causes inflammation, and that can lead to colorectal cancer. And what do we all need to do about this? And this is certainly not that um, controversial because transformation requires acquisition of mutations. Those mutations are in suppressors and oncogenes, and it begins in the intestinal stem cells and can develop over the course of your life. Studies have shown that high fiber diets, low in processed foods, and low in red meats, and exercise and maintaining a healthy weight is protective from developing colon cancer. Carcinogenic microbes colonizing a large portion of humans can potentially alter then host genetics, but also contribute to the carcinogenesis in a host that already is predisposed by their genetics or their dietary composition or in family inflammatory dysregulation. Um, and now we have to think about what about as parents? Do we really need to think about our children if we are feeding them now processed foods and red meats? And is this the reason why we're now seeing the rapid increase in younger patients developing colon cancer? Because think about it, from around the age of around the year of 2015, when we first started to see this increase, what is important about that date? What is approximately 40 years before that date? 40 years before 2015 is 1975. 1975 is when we started really ramping up the processed foods, the increased sugars in our diet, high fructose corn syrups, and multiple of other different dietary changes from the revolution of processed foods that occurred in this country in 1975. Now go to 1985 and the different changes we had then. That is approximately 40 years ago now. What's it going to be like when we get to be 40 years from now, and 40 years from maybe 10 years ago? Certainly over the last 10 years, we have had an improvement in recognition that high fiber diets are important and the prevalence of persons who are eating more vegan food, more whole food diets is increasing slowly. But what's going to happen 40 years from now is that percent of individuals with colon cancer, is it going to be even higher than now? Is it going to be instead of an incidence um, of 10% of colon cancers, is it going to be 50% of colon cancers? We're going to have a wave in 10, 20 years where instead of having only instead of having 15,000 cases per year, are we going to have 50,000? Are we going to be having 100,000 cases per year and many more deaths until we start screening at age 40 or 35, maybe even, to take care of these polyps that were induced by the colibactin producing E. coli. So something to think about, and that microbiome link and what to do about our microbiome. Probiotics, fiber, natural foods, whole foods, mostly plant-based diets. There's going to be more and more studies that are going to elucidate the effects of these improved dietary changes to see if they make an impact on these colon cancer incidences. Or here's a question. Is it going to take many more years after that to discover that we need to have these whole food diets in the years from age 0 and maybe in utero to from age 0 to 10 years of age, 20 years of age, when we're not thinking about our diet, when we're feeding our kids a lot of red meat and a lot of proteins because we need to induce their growth. We think they want to be weightlifters, football players, baseball players. So we pile on and take them out for steak and take them out for low fiber diet restaurants and fast foods and all of that. Is it going to really take until we realize that it's our children that we need to protect and not at age 40 and age 50 like myself, when I'm starting to have a better diet now because I am learning about these things? Is it going to take until then before we figure out that it is our children that we need to be really impacting in the future? Thank you very much for this. I will include the references. There are approximately 5 different references here that I'll include in the show notes for this. Certainly, Alberto Martin is one of the important authors of these articles, but there are multiple other people, including a Dr. Santos, and others who are involved in this. There is an organization in the UK and worldwide that is looking into these different factors as well, and I'll include that in the show notes as well. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you, and have a nice rest of your Sunday. This is Sunday Science from Go Unpro.
This site and any information communicated within it are not intended as medical advice. The information herein is not intended as medical care, diagnosis, or treatment of any medical condition. No component of this content, including discussion or comments, shall be construed or implied as establishing a doctor-patient relationship. Before you translate or copy any of the information, diet, exercise, or products utilized herein or on any social media post to your own practice, consult your own research, physician, therapist, or nutritionist for your own health. No warranties or claims are made as to the benefits or risks of any treatments, diet, exercise, or products herein. Research any treatments, diet, exercise, or products thoroughly before trying for yourself. Referral, affiliate, or advertising fees may be garnered by this site.